My wife Olivia, who is a flight attendant, called me during an international flight. Walter, is Rose home? Yes, she is, I replied. She's in your mother's room. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That's impossible. I have her passport in my hands. She just boarded my flight to Paris. At that exact moment, I heard footsteps behind me. Good, you're here. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of discovery from. I want to see how far it reaches. This weekend, like any other, I was visiting my mother Susan, as I always did. My younger brother Harry had left for work early, leaving the house quiet. My nephew Matthew, that clever little 7-year-old, had already been taken by the school bus. And Rose, my sister-in-law, Harry's wife, had just gone upstairs to my mother's room. Her soft voice drifted down to us. I'm going to rest for a bit. Okay. My mother nodded, smiling. We had barely finished talking when my cell phone rang. I dried my hands and hurried to answer it. My wife Olivia's cheerful, youthful voice filled the line. Walter just wanted to say hi. I have a little free time during a layover at the airport. Hearing her voice was like a warm hug. Olivia is my pride and joy, a seasoned flight attendant who is always on the go, living the dream of conquering the skies. I smiled and asked her a few questions about her flight, about how she was doing. She laughed cheerfully and said everything was great, that work was going well. But suddenly her tone changed, as if she was hesitant to say something. Walter, something very strange happened. Is your sister-in-law Rose there? I was intrigued. I glanced towards the stairs, where I could still hear movement in the room. Of course she is, honey. Rose is upstairs resting, I replied, completely certain. Rose had spoken to us less than 10 minutes ago, and was wearing that white blouse she always wears at home. How could I be wrong? But on the other end of the line, Olivia was silent for a long time. So long that I could hear her breathing. Then her voice became very serious, full of astonishment. Walter, that's impossible because I have her passport right here in my hand. She just boarded my flight to Paris. I laughed, thinking she must be mistaken. Oh, honey, you must have seen wrong. I just saw Rose. She even said she was going to rest. I tried to explain calmly to reassure her, but she didn't laugh. She didn't respond to me as she usually did. She told me in a slow voice, as if she was trying to piece the story together in her head, that after all the passengers had boarded, she found a forgotten passport near the boarding gate. At first, she thought about handing it over to the airport staff. But when she opened it to see who it belonged to, she froze. The photo was of Rose. Her name was there, clear as day. There was no mistaking it. My heart started to beat faster, but I tried to stay calm. Are you sure, Olivia? That passport could be someone else's, I said, even though a small thorn of unease had already pricked me. Olivia sighed, and her voice was now a mixture of bewilderment and firmness. Walter, I just went to the passenger cabin to check if it was her. She's sitting in first class next to a man who looks very rich and elegant. They were talking very closely, like they were a couple. Olivia's words were like a stab. I was paralyzed, holding the phone. My head was spinning. A couple. Impossible. I had just heard Rose's voice from upstairs. I had just seen her in the flesh in this house. But at that exact moment, the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs echoed. I heard Rose's voice reaching us. It was soft, but loud enough to make me jump. Walter, who is it? I panicked. My heart was beating so hard I felt like it would explode out of my chest. Just a client of mine, I replied quickly, my voice trembling, and I turned away to avoid Rose's gaze as she peeked from the top of the stairs, her hair still done up. I closed the living room door and whispered into the phone, trying not to let my nervousness show. Olivia, I just heard Rose. She's here. She just came downstairs. Are you sure you haven't made a mistake? On the other end, Olivia was silent again. And then her voice became harder. Walter, it's impossible. I have her right in front of me on this plane. I'm looking at her now. I was speechless, my mind blank. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped the device. The living room suddenly felt suffocating, even with the bright sun outside. I collapsed on the sofa, trying to take deep breaths, but my chest was heavy with an unanswered question. If Rose was here, who was the woman on Olivia's flight? And if the woman on the flight was Rose, who was the person in my mother's house? A few minutes later, Rose came down to the kitchen. She was wearing a clean light blue dress, her hair still done up, and she smiled with the same sweetness as always. Susan, I'm going to the market earlier today. Do you want me to bring any vegetables or anything like that? Her voice was gentle, familiar, as if nothing strange was happening. I looked at her, trying to force a smile, but inside I felt like I was carrying stones. Yes, dear. Bring some tomatoes, please, my mother replied, her throat dry. Rose nodded. She grabbed the wicker basket and left the house. Her silhouette disappeared behind the gate. I stood there watching her leave with a turmoil in my soul. I didn't believe Olivia was lying to me. My wife had no reason to make up a story like that. She has always been an honest person, very sensitive and caring with the family. But Rose, the sister-in-law with whom my family had lived for so many years, was also in front of us in the flesh. Unmistakable. I wondered, is there something I missed? Is there some secret in this house that I, as a family man, never noticed? I sat in silence in the living room as the midday sun filtered through the curtains, casting faint stripes of light on the tiled floor. The old armchair where my mother always sits to knit or read stories to Matthew also seemed heavier now. Olivia's call kept echoing in my head. Each of her words was like a hammer blow to my heart. I looked around the room where the family photos were hanging. Harry and Rose on their wedding day, Matthew newborn, and Olivia's radiant smile when she first wore her flight attendant uniform. All those memories now seemed covered in a mist, blurred and full of doubt. My name is Walter Brooks, a 45-year-old man who works as an engineer in Phoenix, Arizona. My wife Olivia has been a flight attendant for 15 years, leaving me alone during her trips. My life revolves around weekend visits to my mother Susan, my brother Harry, my sister-in-law Rose, and my nephew Matthew. Rose, my sister-in-law, has always been the perfect role model in my eyes. She was beautiful, hard-working, always impeccable, from the way she dressed to how she took care of Matthew. I still remember their wedding day, a big party held in the backyard of her parents' house. Even though Rose's family wasn't rich, they did their best to make everything perfect. Rose entered our family with a confident smile and a bright look, as if she was born to be a wonderful wife and mother. I used to think about how lucky my brother was to have a wife like her. After Rose left for the market, I sat with my mother, unconsciously holding the edge of the tablecloth. Olivia's call made me re-examine small details that previously seemed normal. There were days when Rose would leave the house saying she was going to the market or to see a friend, but when she came back, she seemed like a different person. One day she was all sweetness, hugging Matthew and singing him to sleep. But on other days she was in a bad mood and yelled at my mother just because she forgot to put the salt shaker back in its place. I used to think it was just the mood swings of a young woman. But now I wasn't so sure. My heart was tied in a knot, as if someone was messing with all the memories I held so dear. I remember once a few months ago, Rose picked up a pen to write the shopping list with her right hand. Her handwriting was very straight and organized. But the next day, I saw her using her left hand and she was writing more scribbled, as if she wasn't used to it. I asked her, "Since when do you write with the other hand, Rose?" She laughed and replied quickly, "Oh, just for fun, Walter. I'm practicing." I nodded without giving it much thought. But now that detail had become a sharp piece in my mind. I was lost in my thoughts when I heard the door open. Matthew ran in, his backpack hitting his back. He hugged my mother tightly, saying with his chirping little voice, "Grandma, the teacher praised me today because I drew very well." My mother stroked his head, trying to smile, but she still felt a weight on her chest. Matthew sat down and took out his notebook to show it. "Uncle Walter, look. Yesterday my mother helped me with my homework with her right hand, and her writing was so beautiful. But today, she wrote with her left and it was uglier." The boy pointed to 2 pages of the notebook, one with well-formed letters and the other with crooked letters. I looked at the handwriting and my heart sank. "Your mother must have been busy today. She was probably tired. That's why she wrote like that," I said, trying to hide my confusion. But Matthew looked up with his innocent eyes. "Uncle Walter, my mother is so strange. Some days she hugs me very, very tightly, but on other days she doesn't even look at me." My nephew's words were another stab. My mother hugged him, trying to comfort him, but in my head, everything was starting to get confusing. At that moment, the doorbell rang. My mother got up, opened the door, and saw Mrs. Collins, our good neighbor, standing there with the plate that Rose had taken to her the day before. She smiled with her usual gentle smile, but there was curiosity in her eyes. "Susan, your daughter-in-law is so kind, but yesterday I noticed that she handed me the plate with her left hand, and Walter told me that she is right-handed, right?" "How strange. Or maybe she uses both hands." My mother forced a smile and replied, "Maybe so, Helen. Would you like to come in for tea?" She nodded and came in, but her comment was like a thorn stuck in me. It wasn't just me. Even the neighbors had noticed the difference. My mother served her tea, and we talked about this and that. But as soon as she left, I sank into the sofa with my hand on my chest. I felt frozen, as if the world was collapsing on me. That afternoon, I went out to the garden with the watering can, trying to let the water fall gently on the daisies that my mother had been taking care of for years. The sun was starting to set. The shadows of the trees stretched across the yard, but my soul could not find peace. Matthew's words, Mrs. Collins's, and Olivia's firm voice on the phone kept circling in my head like stones thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples that wouldn't stop. I was watering the plants, but my mind wasn't there. I wondered, am I too blind to notice the strange things that are happening in my own family? Or have I been closing my eyes on purpose, wanting to believe in the happy family I always dreamed of? Rose returned from the market carrying the wicker basket. But what caught my attention was that she was holding it with her left hand. I remembered perfectly that Rose always used her right hand, from how she held the knife to chop vegetables, to how she combed Matthew's hair. I stood there watching her put the basket on the kitchen table and asked in a low voice, "What did you buy, Rose?" My voice tried to sound natural, but inside a wave of suspicion was growing. She smiled and replied very politely, "I bought some tomatoes, cilantro, and fresh fish. Susan, I'm going to make the baked fish that you like so much tonight. How about that?" Her voice was soft as always, but I couldn't help but notice her hands. The left one? No, the right one. I nodded and turned around, pretending to clean the table, but my heart was beating fast. Was I imagining things, or were these small details trying to tell me something? At dinner time, the whole family gathered at the table. Harry was tired after a long day at work, but he still smiled at Matthew and asked how school had been. Rose ate slowly, delicately, and even turned to Harry to remind him. "Honey, the parent-teacher meeting is next week, so don't forget to take the day off." I looked at her, trying to find the sister-in-law I was so proud of, but in my head, Olivia's voice kept echoing. "She's sitting in first class next to a man." I bit my lip, trying to swallow the anguish, but it felt like a stone stuck in my throat. Just 3 days later, everything was different. Matthew spilled a glass of water during dinner, and the water splashed all over the tablecloth. My mother quickly grabbed a cloth to clean it up, laughing. "It's okay, dear. Just be more careful." But Rose, sitting across from him, suddenly frowned and said in a sharp voice, "Matthew, why are you so clumsy? Be more careful." I was stunned, looking at Harry. He also frowned and said in a low voice, "Rose, it was an accident, that's all." She turned with a spark of anger in her eyes. "You always defend him, and I end up looking like the villain of the house." The atmosphere at the table became heavy. Matthew lowered his head, his eyes full of tears. My mother hugged him, feeling a deep pain. Just a few days ago, Rose had reminded him affectionately about school, and now she seemed like a completely different person. I sat next to her, watching in silence, trying to put the pieces together in my head. Today, she was irritable. The other day, she was so sweet. Today, she used her left hand. The other day, the right one. These small differences, one by one, were accumulating in my mind, like the pieces of a puzzle that I still couldn't see completely. I told myself I had to calm down. But every time I looked at Rose, I saw a stranger, like she wasn't the sister-in-law my family had lived with for so many years. A few days later, I took Matthew to school. He held my hand as we walked down the same cobblestone street as always. Suddenly, he stopped, looked up at me, and said in a sad voice, "Uncle Walter, yesterday my mom taught me how to write, and she was so patient. Her handwriting was so pretty, but today she didn't even want to look at my homework. She told me to do it myself." I knelt down to look into his clear eyes and felt my heart break. "Your mom was busy, sweetie. Don't be sad," I said, but my voice trembled. Matthew nodded, but his gaze was still full of disappointment. I hugged him, feeling a huge sense of helplessness. He's only 7 years old. How was he supposed to understand something I couldn't even understand myself? That night, we sat down for dinner again. Suddenly, Rose took a small notebook out of her purse and started writing something with her left hand. Harry, who was serving himself, suddenly laughed. "Hey, since when do you write with your left hand? It looks so weird." Rose stopped abruptly with a forced smile on her lips. "Oh, just experimenting, honey." She quickly put the notebook back in her purse, but I noticed a flash of panic in her eyes. Harry shook his head and didn't say anything else, but I knew he had noticed something strange too. I sat there, holding my spoon tightly, trying to keep a straight face, but inside the doubts were growing like a slow-burning fire. One morning, I grabbed an empty spice jar and walked down the same cobblestone street to Mrs. Collins's house. Rose had borrowed it a few weeks ago, saying it was for making the chili she loved so much. I knocked on the door, and Mrs. Collins opened it with her usual kind smile. "Walter, come in. Let me make you some coffee," she said, with a dish towel still in her hand. I handed her the jar, thinking I'd thank her and leave, but she pulled me to sit in a wooden chair in her kitchen. The room was cozy. It smelled like roasted coffee, but I couldn't relax. Mrs. Collins looked at me with questioning eyes and lowered her voice. "Walter, please, don't be mad at what I'm going to say. Has your sister-in-law's personality changed? One day, she greets me so cheerfully and even asks about my children. But yesterday, she passed by here. I waved to her, and she didn't even recognize me, like she didn't know me." Mrs. Collins' words were another stone in the turbulent lake of my heart. I forced a smile and replied, "She must be in a hurry, Helen. You know how young people are these days." But inside I was a mess. I knew Mrs. Collins wasn't just talking for the sake of talking. She's a very perceptive person who always pays attention to details. If even she noticed how strange Rose was acting, then my suspicions weren't just my imagination. I stayed for a little longer, took a sip of the now cold coffee, and said goodbye, my heart heavy. On the way back, I passed Mr. Johnson's bakery, where I always bought sweet bread for Matthew. Mr. Johnson was behind the counter, and when he saw me, he smiled. "Mr. Brooks, what can I get for the little champ today?" I ordered some pastries, and he suddenly asked, "You're Harry's brother, right? His wife came by the other day, so nice. She even told me how delicious my bread was. But this morning, she came back with a frown on her face. She bought the bread and didn't even say thank you. She just left." I froze, gripping the strap of my wallet tightly. "She must be tired, Joe," I replied, my voice trembling. I thanked him quickly and left. Mr. Johnson's words were another stab, cutting deeper into the doubts that were growing inside me. When I got to my mom's house, I made some tea and sat on the porch. The wind was blowing gently, carrying the scent of daisies from the garden. I looked at the street leading to the market where Rose always walked. Suddenly, I saw her coming back, carrying her shopping bag, but she greeted me with a dry voice. "Good afternoon, Walter." No smile. No joy like yesterday when she bragged about getting a good price on cilantro. I nodded and replied in a low voice, "You're back already." But inside, I couldn't help but observe her more closely. The blouse she was wearing today was navy blue, different from the white blouse she was wearing when she left. I tried to ask her in a gentle voice, "Why did you change your blouse?" Rose paused for a second and then replied quickly, "Oh, I got it dirty and had to change." She smiled somewhat awkwardly and hurried into the kitchen. I stood there with the teacup in my hands, feeling like a stone was crushing my chest. Mrs. Collins's words, Mr. Johnson's words, and the way Rose answered me. Everything forced me to stop ignoring things. That night we were all having dinner. Matthew was talking about school in his cheerful little voice, but I noticed that Rose only nodded without responding to him, unlike other times. When Harry asked, "Are you done eating so my mom can clear the dishes?" Matthew suddenly turned to my mom and said innocently, "Grandma, oh, my mom didn't sing me to sleep. But yesterday she sang that song, Cielito Lindo, that you always sing to me, and it sounded so beautiful." I looked at Rose, who was serving herself without reacting, but Matthew's words were like a needle in my heart. That lullaby, that Cielito Lindo that my mom used to sing to Harry and me, only Rose and my mom knew in this house. So why did she sing it yesterday and not today? Why did she change so quickly? I got up to help clear the dishes, but my mind wasn't there anymore. I remembered the times when Rose would leave the house saying she was going to see a friend, but she would come back with a strange look. One day she brought a bouquet of fresh flowers, saying a friend had given them to her. But another day, she got angry when I asked, "Where did you go today that you came back so late?" I used to think these were unimportant things, but now they seemed like pieces of a much bigger secret. I didn't want to believe that Rose was hiding something from us, but every word, every gesture of hers made me doubt. That night, after cleaning the kitchen, I sat at the dining room table and took an old notebook from a drawer. My hand was trembling as I wrote the first line. 3:10 p.m. Rose leaves for the market, returns at 6:00 p.m. wearing a blue blouse. Irritable attitude. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that nothing was happening. I kept writing. Yesterday she sang Matthew to sleep tenderly. Today she was cold, didn't sing. Each word was a heavy stroke, as if I were engraving my suspicions into reality. My old notebook was now full of notes about Rose. Each line was a piece of my doubt, as if I were painting a picture I didn't dare look at. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the notebook with a heavy heart. I couldn't keep all these thoughts to myself anymore. They were like waves rising and falling, leaving me alone in my confusion. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would understand me, who wouldn't judge me, who wouldn't jump to conclusions. I immediately thought of Carol, my mom's best friend, who has been with her since they were young, when they used to sit and knit under a tree and tell each other their lives. My mom picked up the phone, her voice trembling. "Carol, are you free this afternoon? Let's go to the coffee shop on the corner. I need to talk." Carol accepted instantly, her voice as warm as ever. "Susan, I knew something was wrong. Wait for me. I'm on my way." I felt a small relief, but the worry was still weighing me down. My mom put on her old shawl, and we left the house for the small coffee shop on the corner, where she and Carol had shared so many joys and sorrows. The place was the same, with its dark wooden tables and that delicious smell of freshly roasted coffee. We chose a table in a corner where the light was dim so no one would overhear our conversation. My mom sat there hugging the cup of hot coffee, but with a cold soul. She wondered how she was going to tell Carol about all these suspicions. How was she going to dare admit that she was doubting her own daughter-in-law? Carol arrived wearing a light sweater and carrying a bag of fresh vegetables. She sat down and looked directly into my mom's eyes with that piercing but affectionate gaze. "Susan, just by looking at your face, I know something big is wrong. Come on, spill it. What's bothering you so much?" My mom took a deep breath, trying not to let her voice fail, but every word got stuck in her throat. She told her everything in a summary. Olivia's call from the airport, Rose's passport, the woman identical to her on the plane, and all the small details she had noted down, from how she changed hands to right to her mood swings from one day to the next. She took the notebook out of her purse and handed it to Carol. "Look, I've written everything down here." "I don't know if I'm imagining things, but I can't be a fool anymore." Carol flipped through the pages with a frown. She read the shaky handwriting slowly. "You've noticed everything, Susan," she said in a serious voice. "Every time she leaves and comes back, it's like she's another person." "What do you think it is?" My mom shook her head, holding the coffee cup tightly. "I don't know, Carol. I just know I'm scared. Scared that Rose is hiding something. Scared that my family will fall apart if I dig deeper. But I can't stop. I have to know the truth. For Harry, for Matthew." Carol put her cup on the table and looked at my mom with determination. "You can't fool a woman easily, Susan. What does your gut tell you?" "I'm sure there's something fishy going on here. You have to get to the bottom of this." My mom hesitated, and her voice became a whisper. "But what if I'm misjudging? What if I hurt Harry?" Carol interrupted her firmly. "Trust your gut. If you don't find out the truth, you'll always live with the doubt. And you won't be able to protect Matthew or Harry." At that moment, Mrs. Jenkins, the lady who sells vegetables at the market and whom we know, came into the coffee shop. She recognized my mom and smiled. "Mrs. Brooks, what a coincidence. Last week I saw your daughter-in-law at the market. She was so kind. She even bought an extra bunch of cilantro to cook with. But this morning she came back looking so serious. She didn't even say hello. She bought her vegetables and left. Is something wrong with your daughter-in-law?" My mom forced a smile and replied, "She must be tired, Marie." But inside, she felt like she was drowning. One more person who noticed how strange Rose was acting. She thanked Mrs. Jenkins, watched her leave, and turned back to Carol. Panic reflected in her eyes. Carol took my mom's hand, and her voice softened. "See, Susan, it's not just you. Even the neighbors notice. Don't lie to yourself anymore. Keep writing everything down, and if you have to, you're going to have to follow her. Not to hurt her, but to protect your family." My mom nodded, but her heart sank. She knew Carol was right, but the idea of following her own daughter-in-law made her feel like she was betraying the family. She had spent her whole life taking care of this house, and now she had to do something she never imagined. Investigate one of her own. That afternoon, we went back home, my head still a mess. Rose left the house carrying her familiar red basket. "Susan, I'm going to the market quickly," she said in a gentle voice. My mom nodded, but as soon as she disappeared behind the gate, she opened her notebook and wrote, 3 p.m. Rose leaves for the market carrying a red basket. Normal attitude. We stood there watching the clock, counting every minute. At 6:00 p.m. Rose returned, but the basket she was holding in her hand was now blue. My mom was surprised and asked her, "Did you change your basket?" She smiled and replied quickly, "Yes, the other one broke, and a friend lent me this one." My mom nodded, but her hands were trembling as she added to the notebook, "Returned at 6:00 p.m., carrying a blue basket, voice a little rushed." My mom's notes were piling up. Each line was a step closer to the truth, but also a step away from the image of the old mom who only knows how to love and trust. The following weekend, Harry left for extra work early, and Matthew was at a school activity, leaving the house silent just for Rose and us. My mom was cleaning the dining room table, trying to keep herself busy to ward off the doubts that were eating away at her. But then, Rose came down from her room wearing a pale yellow floral dress, looking as fresh as in her early days of marriage. "Susan, I'm going to the market quickly," she said in a soft voice. She grabbed her usual wicker basket and left. My mom nodded, smiling, but inside a voice insisted, "Follow her, Susan. Go find the truth." We didn't think twice. My mom grabbed her old shawl, put it over her head to cover her face a little, and we left the house silently, keeping a safe distance behind Rose. The sun was hot. The sweat was soaking our backs, but we didn't care. We just wanted to know where she was really going, what she was doing. Rose walked quickly down the cobblestone street leading to the market. But suddenly, instead of turning right as always, she turned left into an alley behind a working-class neighborhood. The houses were old, huddled against each other with peeling paint and rusty tin roofs. We slowed down, our hearts pounding, trying to hide behind some bicycles parked on the sidewalk. Rose didn't look back. She kept walking. She entered an even narrower alley where the sunlight barely reached. We hid behind an auto repair shop where a man was focused on tightening nuts. We saw Rose stop in front of an old wooden door, knock softly, and then enter and disappear. We stood there, our breathing uneven, our heads spinning. What was my sister-in-law doing there? This wasn't the market or any of the friends' houses she had mentioned. I wanted to walk over there, knock on the door, and ask her directly, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I was afraid of the truth, afraid that what I was about to discover would shatter everything. In the end, we turned around and went home, filled with questions, each step heavier than the last. We had barely pushed open the gate when we froze. Rose was standing in the kitchen, cutting vegetables, wearing a white blouse, completely different from the floral dress she had left in. She was scowling and looked at us with cold, sharp eyes. "Where have you been? Why are you coming back now?" We were paralyzed, our mouths dry, unable to say a word. Just a few minutes ago, I had seen her enter that alley in a yellow dress. How could she have gotten back so quickly? "In that blouse?" I stammered. We just went for a walk, that's all." Rose nodded without saying anything more, but her gaze sent a chill down my spine. We went up to the room pretending to look for something, but really it was to escape that look, to calm our hearts that were beating wildly in our chests. That night, I was sitting in the living room when Matthew ran in, his cheeks red from playing in the yard. He hugged my mother's legs, sobbing. "Grandma," my mom yelled at me just because I dropped a pencil. Not like yesterday. Yesterday, she was so nice, she even hugged me. My mother picked Matthew up in her arms, stroked his head, but inside she felt like she was burning. "Your mom was tired, honey." "Don't be sad," she said, but her voice trembled. Matthew hid his face in her shoulder and whispered, "Grandma, I want yesterday's mom." She hugged him tighter, with tears about to fall. Her grandson's words were like a knife, etching our suspicions even deeper. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The images kept repeating in my head. Rose in the floral dress entering the alley. Rose in the white blouse standing in the kitchen. And Olivia's voice. "She's on my flight." I took the notebook from the drawer and wrote a sentence. I didn't even dare to believe it myself. Maybe they aren't the same person. That sentence felt like a curse and made me tremble. The next morning, I decided to go back to that alley. I couldn't take the doubt anymore. I grabbed the family photo that hangs in the living room, the one where Rose smiles radiantly next to Harry and Matthew. I held it tightly and left the house, determined but terrified. The alley was the same as yesterday, silent and dark. I stopped next to a corn stand where a middle-aged woman was fanning the charcoal. I showed her the photo and asked, "Excuse me, have you seen this woman around here?" The woman looked closely and then pointed. "Oh yes, of course. She goes in and out of the house at number 14 frequently, the one over there." I thanked her, my heart pounding in my throat, and walked straight to that house. The house at number 14 appeared in front of me with stained walls, a peeling wooden door, and a vase with a withered daisy on the windowsill. I stood there, my hands trembling, feeling like the whole world was holding its breath with me. I knocked on the door, and each knock sounded like a hammer blow to my chest. The door opened, and I was speechless. In front of me stood a woman identical to Rose, from her face to her body, to her long black hair. The only difference was her frightened look and her hands that trembled as she held a cloth. I stammered, my voice choked. "Rose." The young woman was startled, squeezed the cloth tightly, and tried to slam the door shut. But at that moment, another voice was heard from inside. A soft but firm voice. "Evelyn, don't hide anymore. You know this is wrong too." I looked up and saw a young woman come out of a corner of the room, standing right behind the woman who looked exactly like Rose. She was thin, with her hair pulled back in a bun, and had an intelligent but gentle look. She looked at me and smiled slightly. "My name is Lucy Miller, Evelyn's roommate, Mr. Brooks. Please come in. It's time you knew the truth." I took a deep breath, trying to stop my legs from trembling, and entered that small, tin-roofed house. The walls were stained, the concrete floor was cracked, and a faint smell of disinfectant hung in the air. In a corner, an old man coughed weakly, lying on an old cot covered with a frayed blanket. I felt the space crushing me, but still I walked in and sat down on the wooden chair that Lucy pointed to. The woman identical to Rose lowered her face, and her voice was almost a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I'm not Rose. My name is Evelyn." I looked at her, my mind in a whirlwind, unable to say anything. Evelyn. The name was strange, but the face was too familiar. I clasped my hands together, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're going to explain to me why you look so much like my sister-in-law and why you appear at my mother's house." Evelyn raised her eyes, full of guilt, but did not answer immediately. Instead, Lucy sat down next to her, poured a glass of water from an old plastic jug, and began to speak. "Evelyn is very poor, Mr. Brooks," Lucy said in a calm and clear voice. "Her foster parents are very sick, especially the gentleman lying there. A few years ago, Evelyn met Rose by chance at a market. They looked like two peas in a pod, and Rose took advantage of that. She proposed that Evelyn pretend to be her, that she replace her for a few hours whenever she needed to. Evelyn didn't want to, but Rose paid very well, and her family needed the money for medicine. I looked at Evelyn and saw that her head was down, squeezing the cloth so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Replace her for what? I insisted, my voice full of disbelief. Why would Rose need someone to pretend to be her? Evelyn raised her eyes, her voice trembling. I don't know everything, sir. She just told me, you just stay in the house for a few hours, do some things like go to the market, take care of the boy. And then she gave me money, a lot of money, enough to buy my parents' medicine. I didn't dare ask more. She lowered her head, and tears began to roll down her face. I looked at her, my chest tight. Every strange detail of the last few months suddenly made sense. The change of hands for writing, the personality that was sometimes sweet and sometimes sour, the voice that was sometimes gentle and sometimes cold. Everything fit together now, like the last pieces of a puzzle that I refused to see. Lucy continued with a more penetrating look. I don't know if this helps, but once I saw Rose with a very elegant man. His name is Jack Ford. I heard the name when they were talking in a coffee shop. They were calling each other dear, very affectionately. At that moment, Evelyn was waiting outside in the car, not understanding anything. The name Jack Ford was like a stab in my heart. I remembered Olivia's words. She's sitting in first class next to a rich man. The small room seemed to spin around me. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking so much that I dropped the glass of water. Lucy rushed to clean it up, but I just shook my head. My voice choked. Rose is deceiving my family. Evelyn broke down, her voice choked with sobs. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to save my parents. I looked at this young woman with a face identical to Rose's, but with a look full of pain and regret. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout. But seeing Evelyn, I only felt pity. She wasn't the mastermind behind everything. She was just a piece in Rose's game. Everything was collapsing in front of me. I stood up, trying to make my voice sound steady. Evelyn, do you know where Rose is? Do you know what she does when she asks you to pretend to be her? Evelyn shook her head, still crying. I don't know, sir. She just told me to do what she asked and that she would pay me. I didn't dare ask more. Lucy put her hand on her shoulder to comfort her and then turned to me. Mr. Brooks, I know this is very painful for you, but Evelyn is also a victim. She had no other choice. I looked around the humble house, hearing the weak voice of the man on the cot. I understood Evelyn's desperation, but that didn't erase the feeling of betrayal I felt. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the tears. I don't blame you, Evelyn, but I need to know the truth. I need to protect my brother and my nephew. I got up feeling like the world was collapsing on me. Thank you, Lucy, for telling me the truth. I'll be back. I left the house, and the bright sun outside blinded me, but my heart was cold. The next morning I returned to that small alley where the stained walls and the peeling wooden door had become an obsession in my mind. The sun was still hot, but I felt a chill inside, as if I were carrying an icy wind of unresolved doubts. I knocked on the door at number 14, holding the family photo as if it were an amulet that would give me the courage to face the truth. This time Evelyn didn't seem so scared. She opened the door with a still shy but calmer look and invited me in. Mr. Brooks, I was expecting you. Please come in. The house was still small, with that smell of disinfectant and the weak cough of the man on the cot. I sat down on the old wooden chair and looked at Evelyn. She was wearing a simple blouse, with her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked tired, but no longer scared. I took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Evelyn, I want to meet your adoptive mother. I need to understand all this better. Evelyn nodded and led me to a corner of the room where a very thin woman, with completely white hair, was lying in bed, her cloudy eyes fixed on the ceiling. It was Mrs. Jones, Evelyn's adoptive mother. I took her frail hand and introduced myself. I am Walter Brooks, Harry's brother, Rose's brother-in-law. Mrs. Jones looked at me, breathing with difficulty, and said in a weak voice, Evelyn is not of my blood. She is a child I adopted when she was a newborn. Her words were like a bomb that exploded in the room. Harry froze, clenching his fists so hard they turned white. Matthew started to cry and ran to hug my mother, his voice trembling. Grandma, what did my mom say? My mother hugged him tight and tears rolled down her face. I looked at Rose with a broken heart. She was there with a cold look, without a shred of remorse. Harry stood up, his voice trembling. Rose, do you really think that? She turned and left without answering. Evelyn, who had remained silent beside her, suddenly spoke in a low but clear voice. Sister, you didn't have to hurt them like that. I just wanted to help you, but I didn't know you would go so far. Rose shot a furious look at her, but said nothing. She just turned and left. The door slammed shut, leaving the room in a painful silence. After that night of confrontation, the air in our house seemed to have been robbed of life. The living room that used to be filled with Matthew's laughter and Harry's conversations was now in a silence that suffocated. I had lived my whole life for my family, but now I felt like someone who had just survived a hurricane, standing in the middle of the rubble of the house I had taken care of so much. Rose left after shouting those bitter words, leaving Harry with an empty look and Matthew with innocent tears. I knew that everything had changed forever. A week later, Harry and Rose went to court for the divorce. I didn't go, but Harry told me about it later, his voice dry as if he had lost his soul. Walter, she didn't look at me or Matthew. She signed the papers and left with that man as if we had never existed. I sat next to him, taking his hand, trying not to cry. Rose didn't ask for custody of Matthew, as if the boy was just part of a piece she had grown tired of. My heart ached, not only for Harry but for Matthew, a 7-year-old boy who didn't deserve to be abandoned that way. Don't worry, Harry, I said, my voice trembling. I'll always be here, and Matthew will never be without love. But inside I knew that this wound would take a long time to heal. Harry fell apart. He was quiet, spoke little. He just buried himself in his work, or sat watching Matthew play in the yard. I looked at my brother and saw in his eyes the same sadness that our father had in his last days. I wanted to hug him to tell him that everything would be okay, but I didn't know where to start. Fortunately, Evelyn appeared, silent as a small light in the darkness. She came to the house every day. She brought pots of hot food, sat down to play with Matthew, and wiped away his tears when he asked, "Auntie, where did my mom really go?" I looked at Evelyn. I saw that face identical to Rose's, but with a completely different heart. She was sweet, patient, and always found a way to make Matthew laugh. One afternoon, I saw Matthew run to hug Evelyn with his cheerful little voice. "Mom, Evelyn, teach me how to draw a bird." I was surprised, my heart squeezed. The boy was calling her mom with a carefree smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. Evelyn laughed and stroked his head. "Of course, my love, but you have to draw it very pretty so I can see it." I stood there, tears rolling down my face. Matthew's innocent words were like a medicine that relieved my pain. I knew that Evelyn had not only replaced Rose during those days of deception, but was becoming part of our family with her own sincere heart. One night, while I was cleaning the kitchen, Harry called me to the living room. He was there holding a small ring with trembling hands. His look was a mixture of nervousness and determination. Evelyn was next to him, her face flushed and her eyes shining. Harry knelt down and his voice faltered. "Evelyn, I don't want to waste any more time. You brought light back to me and Matthew. Would you agree to be my wife and Matthew's mother?" Evelyn started to cry, looking at my mother as if seeking her approval. My mother walked up to her, took her hand, and nodded gently. "You deserve it, dear. You've been part of this family for a long time." She hugged my mother. Her tears soaked her shoulder, and I knew that was the moment when my family was beginning to heal. Harry and Evelyn's wedding was soon after. Something small but full of love. I stood in the yard looking at the red roses tied to the fence, listening to Matthew's laughter as he put on his little suit, being the best man for his dad. Olivia returned from a work trip and stood beside me with a smile as radiant as the day she first put on her flight attendant uniform. My mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of loss, but of happiness. I looked at Evelyn in her simple wedding dress, holding Harry's hand, and I knew my family had found a genuine heart. After losing a fraud, life after that returned to normal. Evelyn kept her life simple, taking care of Harry and Matthew with all her love. She cooked warm meals, sang Matthew to sleep with the same Cielito Lindo my mother used to sing to us. Every night she sat next to Harry, listening to him talk about his projects with a look full of pride. Matthew no longer asked about his other mother. He just snuggled up with Evelyn, calling her mom with a radiant smile. I looked at my family and saw how the wounds were slowly closing. One night I sat on the porch. The wind blew gently through the garden. Matthew's laughter could be heard from inside, mixed with Evelyn's sweet voice. I peeked inside and saw Harry focused on his work while Evelyn prepared a cup of tea for him, placing it beside him, and giving him a soft kiss on the forehead. I smiled, feeling my heart finally at peace. I thought about the long journey I had traveled since the first doubts, from Olivia's phone call to that dark alley where I discovered the truth. The truth had been cruel, but as our father used to say, "The truth will set you free, Walter." And it did. The truth set us free. It brought us Evelyn and gave us a new beginning, much brighter and happier. The story you just heard has been altered in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We are not telling this to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect on how many men are suffering in silence within their own families. I really wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to recover the truth? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can light the way for another person. May God always bless you, and I am convinced that courage leads us to better days. In the meantime, on the end screen, I'm leaving you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment. Were like a hammer blow to my head. I froze, my heart beating faster, but I tried to make my voice sound calm. Please tell me how it all happened. The lady coughed and then slowly began to tell me a story I wasn't prepared for. Many years ago, I was a nurse in a hospital in a small town, she began, her voice trembling. A very poor family had twin girls. They were so poor they couldn't keep both of them. The mother was crying. She said she could only keep one. The other one they were going to abandon. My heart broke. I couldn't let them abandon that baby. So I adopted her. That's Evelyn. She paused for a long cough and then looked at Evelyn with immense love. I raised her as if she were my own, but I know she always wanted to find her real parents. I have nothing to give her besides my love and this house. I sat there holding the edge of the chair, my head spinning. Do you know who Evelyn's biological parents are? I asked, my voice trembling. Mrs. Jones shook her head. I only know they were a poor family from a nearby town. I didn't ask much. I just wanted to save the child. I looked at Evelyn and saw her with her face down, tears streaming. Mr. Brooks, I don't know anything about my biological parents, she said, her voice choked. But when I met Rose, I thought maybe she knew something. She looked so much like me, but she never told me anything about it. I felt short of breath. I asked Mrs. Jones to let me see her old documents, hoping to find a clue. She pointed to an old wooden dresser. Evelyn took out a yellowed paper envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a copy of some hospital papers with Evelyn's birth date. I read them quickly and felt my heart stop. Evelyn's birth date was exactly the same as Rose's, which I had seen in her documents when she married Harry. I held the documents with trembling hands and looked at Evelyn. You and Rose might be twin sisters, I said, my voice lost. Evelyn broke down crying, covering her face. So Rose is my sister. Why didn't she tell me anything? Why did she make me do all that? I looked at her, my heart breaking. I remembered the days when Rose came to our house, radiant and confident, as if she had been born to be the perfect wife and mother. I had admired her. I had believed that she would bring happiness to Harry, but now I knew that she had not only deceived my family, but had also taken advantage of her own sister, using her as a look-alike to hide secrets that I didn't even dare to imagine. I stood up, put my hand on Evelyn's shoulder, and my voice, although firm, could not hide the pain. Evelyn, from today on, I won't let anyone take advantage of you anymore. I will help your parents with the illness, but in return, you have to cooperate with me. I need to bring this truth to light for Harry, for Matthew. Evelyn nodded, still crying. I will help you. I don't want to live in this lie anymore. I looked at her and saw sincerity in her eyes, and for the first time I felt a ray of hope in the middle of the storm. I left the house and walked down the alley, my soul in turmoil. I passed the bustling market where people were shopping and laughing. But in my mind, Mrs. Jones's words echoed like bells. Two twins, one abandoned, the other raised, and now their destinies had crossed in my own family. I went back home, my soul in tatters like a field after a storm. The truth about Rose and Evelyn, the secret of the twins, was a stone crushing my chest. I was at a crossroads for which I was not prepared. Confront my sister-in-law, the woman who had deceived us all, and reveal the truth to Harry and Matthew. That night I called Olivia. My voice was firm, although my heart was trembling. Olivia, you have to come home tomorrow night. There are some things I need you to clarify. Olivia was surprised. I could hear the concern in her voice. Walter, has something serious happened? I said bluntly, you just come, dear. I need you, and if you can bring Rose's passport. She didn't ask any more questions. She just said, yes, Walter, I'll be there. I hung up and sat down, feeling like the whole world was collapsing on me. I knew that tomorrow night would be a night that no one in this family would ever forget. The next day, my mother got up early and prepared a big family dinner. She put a white tablecloth on the table, lit some candles. She cooked the chili that Harry likes so much and the baked fish that Matthew always asks for. She wanted this dinner to be special, not to celebrate, but to mark a before and after. She was in the kitchen cutting vegetables, but her mind was elsewhere, between that dark alley and Evelyn's words. She told herself that she had to be strong for Harry, for Matthew, but each cut of the knife felt like a cut in her own heart. Harry arrived home when it was starting to get dark, tired from work. Seeing the table set, he was surprised. What are we celebrating? Why did you make so much food, Mom? My mother smiled, trying to look calm. I just wanted us all to have a nice dinner. Sit down, dear. Rose came in with her light blue dress, a soft smile, but with a bit of nervousness in her eyes. Matthew ran to hug my mother's legs. Grandma, the fish smells so good. She stroked his head with a lump in her throat. She knew that, after this night, Matthew's innocent smile might never be so carefree again. We sat at the table, and at first the atmosphere was lively. Harry was talking about work. Matthew was talking excitedly about the drawing he had made at school. Rose nodded, commenting occasionally, but I noticed that her hand was shaking a little as she held the spoon. I took a deep breath and signaled to Olivia, who was waiting outside. She came in, and right behind her was Evelyn, in a simple dress, her face identical to Rose's, but with a look full of anguish. Everyone at the table fell silent. Matthew looked confused from Rose to Evelyn and asked innocently, "Why are there two moms?" Harry paled, dropped his spoon, and Rose stood up, shouting, "What is this about, Walter?" I stood up, holding the edge of the table to keep from trembling. "Sit down, Rose," I said in a slow but firm voice. "I need us to clarify everything." I began to tell the story, and each word tore me apart inside. The phone call from Olivia from the airport, when she saw her on a flight to Paris, even though she was home, the time she switched hands to write. Her personality, sometimes sweet and sometimes bitter. And finally, my visit to the alley where I met Evelyn and discovered the secret of the twins. "You and Evelyn are twin sisters," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "You took advantage of your sister to hide the truth. Tell us what the truth is." Rose was trembling, her face white as paper. She shouted, trying to defend herself. "He's making it all up to humiliate me. How dare you?" But Olivia approached and placed a stack of papers on the table with a thud. "This is a copy of your passport with the entry and exit stamp from France," she said in a harsh voice. "You can't be at home and flying to Paris at the same time." Rose looked at the papers, her lips sealed, unable to say anything. Matthew, sitting next to her, suddenly interrupted with an innocent but pained voice. "It's true, Uncle Walter. Some days my mom is an angel and other days she's very mean. I don't like the mean mom." My nephew's words were like a stab, and I had to restrain myself from crying. The air in the room felt so heavy that it was hard to breathe. I nodded and signaled to Lucy, who had just entered through the back door. She stood there with her piercing gaze and said to everyone, "I saw Rose with Jack Ford. They were calling each other my dear, and it was she who hired Evelyn to impersonate her and deceive the family." Harry turned to his wife, his voice choked. "Is it true, Rose? Tell me, is it true?" Rose bit her lip in silence for a long moment and suddenly shouted, her voice full of fury. "Yes, it's true. I have a lover. I'm sick of this poor life. I'm sick of being the daughter-in-law of this house. Jack gives me a life 100 times better. And you, Harry, you're good for nothing.